He only thought about business until he saw his son smile for the first time in years. The person responsible? A waitress who danced without fear, right in the middle of the party. In that moment, something changed inside him, as if he'd awakened from a deep sleep. And that's when he made the most unexpected decision of his life. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The elevator rose to the 30th floor in absolute silence. Michael Harrison watched the digital numbers change with the same precision with which he monitored the financial reports of his companies. 42 years old, perfectly combed gray hair, impeccable Italian suit. Everything about him exuded control and success. For 20 years he had built a business empire, turning every decision into profit, every relationship into a business opportunity. When the doors opened, his footsteps echoed down the marble corridor toward the penthouse. The house was a perfect reflection of his personality, modern, functional, without emotional excesses. Each piece of furniture had its exact position. Each object served a specific purpose. That's how Michael viewed life. A great project to be executed with maximum efficiency. But today something was different. The customary silence of the house seemed heavier, charged with a tension he preferred to ignore. He went directly to his home office, where a stack of contracts awaited his signature. He sat down at the mahogany desk and opened the first document, but the words seemed blurred. His mind was elsewhere in a past that insisted on resurfacing. 7 years ago, when Jennifer got pregnant, Michael had planned everything down to the smallest detail. The baby's room was decorated by a renowned designer. The crib imported from Europe. The best pediatricians in the city were already on retainer. He had created spreadsheets with estimated expenses for the next 18 years of the child's life, including education at the best private schools and a savings account that would secure his son's future. The delivery went without complications. Ethan was born healthy, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's determined chin. Michael held the baby for a few minutes, feeling a strange mixture of pride and responsibility. That child would be molded by him, would grow up following his values of discipline and determination. Another successful project in his life. The first 2 years were exactly as he had planned. Ethan developed normally, hitting all the expected milestones right on schedule. Michael supervised everything from a distance, relying on the nanny's reports and regular medical checkups. He worked 16 hours a day, convinced he was building his son's future through his own financial success. It was on a Tuesday afternoon that everything fell apart. Jennifer had taken Ethan to the park, while Michael participated in an important video conference with Japanese investors. The phone rang during the presentation. He looked at the screen, saw his wife's name, and decided to ignore it. Business first, always. The second call came 5 minutes later, and the third. Michael felt growing irritation. Jennifer knew that Tuesdays were sacred for international meetings. He shut down his laptop and answered the phone impatiently. Her voice was trembling so much that Michael had to ask her to repeat her words. Accident, hospital, Ethan. The words mixed in a confused haze as he tried to process the information. For the first time in decades, Michael Harrison completely lost control. The journey to the hospital was a blur of red lights and irritated horns. Michael drove on autopilot, his mind trying to reorganize the reality that had just collapsed. When he arrived at the emergency room, he found Jennifer sitting in a plastic chair, her face stained with tears and dirt from the park. Ethan had fallen from the swing. An apparently simple fall, but one that resulted in a spinal cord injury. The doctors explained in technical terms that Michael pretended to understand, but the message was clear. His 3-year-old son would never walk again. A wheelchair would be his companion for the rest of his life. In the months that followed, Michael did what he knew how to do best. He transformed the tragedy into a project. He hired the best physical therapists in the country, imported rehabilitation equipment from Germany, remodeled the entire house to make it accessible. Ethan had therapy sessions 6 times a week, psychological counseling, specialized educational activities. Michael created a military routine for his son. 7 in the morning, strengthening exercises. 8:30, breakfast balanced by a nutritionist. 9:15, physical therapy session. And so on until 8 at night. Each activity had a specific goal. Each progress was measured and documented. But there was something that no spreadsheet could capture. Ethan no longer smiled. The child who used to run through the house making noise now followed the routine in silence, like a small robot programmed to obey. His eyes, once bright with childish curiosity, had become opaque, distant. Michael preferred to interpret this as concentration. Ethan was focused on recovery, dedicated to the exercises. It was natural that a child in intensive treatment would become more serious. At least that's what he told himself during sleepless nights, when the silence of the house forced him to confront thoughts he preferred to avoid. Jennifer tried to talk about it. She suggested that perhaps Ethan needed more free time, games without therapeutic purpose, moments when he could simply be a child. Michael listened politely, but deep down he thought it unproductive. Games wouldn't help Ethan walk again. Discipline would. The distance between father and son grew every day. Michael visited Ethan's room religiously, always at the same time, always with the same script, checking if the exercises were being done correctly, reviewing the therapist's reports, adjusting details of the routine. He spoke to Ethan as he would speak to an employee, using a professional tone and clear objectives. Ethan responded with monosyllables. "Yes, Dad." "No, Dad." "Okay, Dad." He never cried, never complained, never asked for anything. He simply existed within the structure created by Michael, like a silent cog in a well-oiled machine. Michael interpreted this docility as success. Ethan was adapting, accepting his new reality with impressive maturity for a child his age. It was a sign that the strict upbringing was working, that his son was developing the same self-control that had made Michael successful in business. On the eve of Ethan's 5th birthday, Michael decided to organize a different kind of party. It wouldn't be a common celebration, but an educational-themed event about overcoming and determination. He invited other families with special children, hired motivational kid speakers, scheduled activities that combined fun with learning. The party would be held in the ballroom of a 5-star hotel. Michael supervised every detail, the menu created by a chef specializing in children's nutrition, the decoration that balanced joy with sobriety, the schedule of activities that would ensure maximum use of time. Jennifer tried to suggest something simpler, more like normal children's parties, but Michael was convinced that Ethan deserved something special, something that would mark his journey of growth and overcoming. After all, it wasn't every day that a child turned 5 having overcome so many challenges. On the morning of the party, while checking the final details with the hotel staff, Michael felt satisfied with his own work. Once again, he had transformed a complex situation into a well-executed project. Ethan would have an unforgettable party, and everyone would see how the Harrison family knew how to turn adversities into opportunities for growth. The party started promptly at 3 o'clock. Michael positioned himself strategically near the entrance of the ballroom, greeting each invited family with a firm handshake and a protocol smile. He wore his navy blue suit, reserved for special occasions, a discreet tie, and freshly polished Italian leather shoes. Even at a children's party, he maintained the business posture that defined him. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, pushed by the nanny in a wheelchair decorated with golden balloons. Michael had insisted on the gold color, a symbol of victory and achievement. The boy wore a miniature blazer identical to his father's, an impeccable white shirt and a blue tie. He looked like a miniature executive, serious and composed. The ballroom was exactly as Michael had planned. Round tables with educational flower arrangements, each representing a lesson about perseverance. The main table displayed a photographic exhibition showing Ethan's evolution over the past 2 years, with colorful graphs documenting his therapeutic progress. The other children began to arrive with their parents. Michael observed each family, mentally cataloging their stories of overcoming. There was Mary Claire, 6 years old, who was born with Down syndrome. Her parents were doctors like Jennifer and had transformed their daughter's condition into a personal crusade for inclusion. Ryan, 8 years old, had lost his vision at 4, but was developing extraordinary musical abilities under the guidance of specialized teachers. Michael felt comfortable in that environment. These were people who, like him, had faced unexpected challenges and responded with planning and determination. Parents who understood the importance of structure, routine, and clear goals. There was no room for self-pity or unproductive lamentations. The party schedule followed the plan rigorously. 3:15. Presentation by the young speaker, a teenage wheelchair user who had become a Paralympic swimming champion. 3:45. Educational snack with nutritional explanations. 4:15. Start of supervised recreational activities. Ethan participated in everything with the same docility as always. He applauded politely, answered when questioned, followed the monitor's instructions. Michael felt proud seeing how appropriately his son behaved, without tantrums or excessive displays of emotion. It was proof that his education was forming a mature and balanced young man. But there was something in the atmosphere that bothered him, although he couldn't identify exactly what. The other children seemed more spontaneous, more childlike. They laughed loudly, asked inconvenient questions, showed genuine enthusiasm for the activities. Ethan, on the other hand, maintained a neutral expression as if he were fulfilling another obligation in his daily routine. Michael decided not to be influenced by these irrelevant details. A well-educated child was naturally more restrained. Ethan was simply demonstrating precocious maturity, an admirable quality that would help him in the future. It was during the break between scheduled activities that Michael noticed unusual movement near the buffet. A young woman wearing a simple hotel uniform was kneeling next to one of the invited children, apparently helping with something. Michael frowned. The waitstaff had clear instructions to maintain a respectful distance from the guests, especially the children. He approached to check the situation, ready to intervene if necessary. The young woman appeared to be about 25, brown hair tied in a simple bun, no elaborate makeup. She wore the standard uniform of the hotel's female employees: white blouse, black skirt to the knees, comfortable flat shoes. She was talking quietly with Ryan, the blind boy, explaining where each type of snack was on the buffet. Her voice was soft but clear, without the overly didactic tone that Michael used to hear from specialized professionals. She spoke to Ryan as she would speak to any child, without dramatization or condescension. Michael stopped a few meters away, observing the interaction. The young woman took Ryan's hand and guided it gently over the trays, allowing him to identify each option by touch and aroma. When Ryan chose his favorite snacks, she placed them on a plate and briefly described the arrangement of the food, so he could eat with autonomy. What most impressed Michael was the naturalness of the scene. The young woman didn't seem to be following a service protocol or specialized training. She was simply helping a child who needed assistance, in the same way she would help anyone in a similar situation. Ryan thanked her and returned to his table, smiling. Michael realized he had witnessed something different from what he was used to. Most professionals who worked with Ethan adopted a technical posture, explaining each procedure in medical or pedagogical terms. This young woman, however, had simply been kind. He decided not to interrupt but remained attentive to her movements. During the next few minutes, he observed how she interacted discreetly with other children. She helped Mary Claire reach a napkin, briefly chatted with a boy who seemed bored, offered water to a child who had gotten dirty while playing. In all cases, her approach was the same. Simple, direct, without exaggeration. She treated each child as a unique individual, not as a representative of a specific medical condition. Michael, accustomed to dealing with therapists who spoke in technical terms and therapeutic goals, found that spontaneity intriguing. It was 5 o'clock when something happened that Michael never expected to witness. Ethan was sitting alone at one of the tables, watching the other children play an adapted game of charades. He wasn't actively participating, just watching with his usual neutral expression. The young woman approached him naturally, pulled up a chair, and sat down beside him. Michael tensed, ready to intervene if she tried to force Ethan to participate in some unscheduled activity, but she simply sat in silence for a few moments, watching the game together with Ethan. After a few minutes, she commented on something about the funny expressions the children made during the charades. Ethan looked at her for the first time, apparently interested. Michael couldn't hear the conversation, but noticed that Ethan was responding to her questions, not just with polite monosyllables, but with complete sentences. The young woman pointed to one of the children who was trying to imitate an elephant, making exaggerated gestures with his arms. Ethan watched attentively and, to Michael's complete surprise, showed what almost seemed like a smile, not the forced smile he displayed in official photos, but a genuine expression of amusement. Michael felt something strange in his chest, a mixture of surprise and something he couldn't name. It had been months since he had seen Ethan show spontaneous interest in anything. The boy seemed genuinely engaged in the conversation, relaxed in a way that Michael didn't recognize. The young woman continued talking with Ethan for a few more minutes. At some point, she asked a question that made Ethan laugh. A quiet, almost shy laugh, but unmistakably real. Michael was paralyzed. When was the last time he had heard his son really laugh? He couldn't remember. Jennifer appeared at Michael's side at that moment, following his gaze toward Ethan. She also noticed the change in their son's expression and gently touched her husband's arm. The party continued following the established schedule, but Michael could no longer concentrate on the organizational details. His attention was completely focused on Ethan, who had returned to his usual neutral expression after the young woman moved away to continue working. When the party ended and the guests began to leave, Michael remained in the ballroom longer than necessary, watching the staff clear the tables. The young woman worked silently, collecting used plates and glasses, without drawing attention to herself. Michael realized he didn't even know her name. In all the planning meetings for the party, he had dealt only with the hotel's event manager. The waitstaff was just part of the logistics, not people with individual identities. But now, for the first time, one of those people had accomplished something that all the specialized therapists, with their degrees and advanced techniques, had not been able to do: make Ethan genuinely laugh. As the family prepared to leave, Michael looked once more in the direction of the young woman. She was finishing cleaning one of the tables, focused on her work. For a moment he thought about approaching and thanking her, but he didn't know exactly what for. How would he thank someone for making his son laugh? How would he explain that those few minutes of spontaneous conversation had been more significant than months of specialized therapy? Michael left the party with a strange feeling, as if something important had happened without him completely understanding what. On the way home, Ethan remained quiet in the back seat, but Michael noticed something different in his silence. It was no longer the empty quietness of before, but something that seemed almost contentment. For 3 weeks after the party, Michael tried to return to his usual routine, but something had irreversibly changed in his perception. Ethan's laughter echoed in his mind at the most unexpected moments, during important meetings, in morning traffic, before falling asleep. It was a sound he had forgotten to value, and now its absence had become deafening. Ethan had returned to his usual behavior after the party. He followed the therapeutic routine with the same docility as before, answered questions with mechanical politeness, participated in activities without showing genuine enthusiasm. To any outside observer, everything was normal. But Michael, for the first time, noticed the emptiness behind this normalcy. It was on a rainy Thursday that Michael made an impulsive decision. He cancelled 2 important meetings and drove to the hotel where Ethan's party had been held. He didn't have a specific plan, just an inexplicable need to better understand that young woman who had managed to touch his son in such a natural way. The event manager received him with respectful surprise. Michael invented an excuse about evaluating the hotel for future corporate events, but he actually wanted to find out more about the employee who had caught his attention. After a few carefully casual questions, he discovered that her name was Sarah, and that she worked part-time at the hotel to pay for her education degree. Sarah wasn't working that day, but Michael got the information that she also worked at a cafe downtown. He drove there, driven by a curiosity he couldn't rationally explain. After all, what did he expect to discover? How could an informal conversation with a waitress clarify his doubts about his own son's education? The cafe was small and cozy, very different from the sophisticated restaurants Michael frequented. Simple wooden tables, unpretentious decoration, the aroma of homemade bread in the air. Sarah was behind the counter, taking a customer's order, wearing an embroidered apron and smiling genuinely. Michael sat at a corner table and ordered just a coffee, watching Sarah work. She treated each customer with personalized attention, remembering individual preferences, making small talk that seemed sincere. There was something in her way of relating to people that contrasted drastically with the professional and calculated interactions of Michael's world. When she finally approached his table, Michael felt an inexplicable nervousness. Sarah recognized him immediately, smiling with genuine warmth. "You're Ethan's dad, right? From the party at the hotel?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's a very special boy. How is he doing?" Michael was disarmed by the simplicity of the question. He was used to technical reports about Ethan's progress, development charts, specialized assessments. No one had simply asked how his son was doing. "He's fine," Michael replied, not knowing how to elaborate, "following the therapeutic routine, progressing as expected." Sarah tilted her head slightly, as if she were hearing something beyond the words. "And how is he really doing?" she gently insisted. The question hit Michael like a punch to the stomach. For the first time, someone was asking about Ethan as a person, not as a patient or rehabilitation project. Michael realized he didn't know how to answer. "Can I sit for a minute?" Sarah asked, indicating the empty chair in front of him. "It's slow right now." Michael nodded, still processing the previous question. Sarah sat down naturally, as if deep conversations with unknown customers were a daily routine. "Ethan seemed like a very intelligent child to me," she said, resting her elbows on the table, "but also very quiet. He doesn't smile much, does he?" Michael felt something contract in his chest. "Ethan has been through a lot of changes," he responded defensively. "It's natural that he's more reserved. We're focusing on developing essential skills." Sarah nodded understandingly, but her gaze remained gentle and direct. "I grew up with a brother who was born with cerebral palsy," she said softly. "My parents also became very focused on his development, the therapies, the medical progress." Michael leaned forward, interested despite himself. "For years our house became a clinic," Sarah continued. "Specialists coming and going, rigid schedules, goals to be achieved. My brother improved a lot physically, but something was missing." "What was missing?" Michael asked, although he suspected the answer. "He had forgotten how to be a child," Sarah said simply. "He was so busy being a patient that there was no time left to just be himself." Michael remained silent, absorbing the words. It was as if Sarah was describing Ethan's life with surgical precision. "How did you solve that?" he finally asked. Sarah smiled, and Michael noticed how her expression became luminous when she talked about things that really mattered to her. "My mom decided that my brother needed free afternoons. No therapy, no exercises, no goals. Just time to play, make a mess, behave like any child his age. And it worked. At first, he didn't know what to do with the freedom," Sarah admitted. "He had become so accustomed to structure that he felt lost without specific instructions. But gradually he began to rediscover things he had forgotten. The pleasure of getting his hands dirty with paint, of laughing at silly jokes, of asking questions without an educational purpose." Michael remained quiet, processing the story. It was difficult to imagine Ethan doing anything without an educational or therapeutic purpose. "Ethan reminded me a lot of my brother at that time," Sarah continued gently. "A wonderful, intelligent child, but who seemed to be living someone else's life, as if he had forgotten who he was behind all the treatments and expectations." Sarah's words found something deep in Michael, a truth that he had buried under layers of rational justifications. Ethan really had become a stranger to him, a miniaturized version of what Michael thought a child should be, not who Ethan really was. "What would you suggest?" Michael asked, surprised by his own vulnerability. Sarah thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe Ethan needs time to simply be a child. Time without an agenda, without goals, without pressure to improve or progress. Just time to discover what he likes, what makes him laugh, how he wants to spend an afternoon." Michael felt instinctive resistance to the idea. Time without goals seemed wasteful, especially when Ethan had so much to recover. But at the same time, the memory of his son's genuine laughter at the party continued to echo in his mind. "Would you have time to spend an afternoon with Ethan?" Michael asked impulsively, surprising himself. "Just to, I don't know, do normal things that children do?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, clearly considering the unusual proposal. "I'm not a therapist," she said carefully. "I don't have specialized training." "Maybe that's exactly why Ethan responded to you," Michael replied, realizing the truth in his own words. "Maybe he needs someone who sees him as a child, not as a patient." Sarah smiled again, and Michael felt something warm in his chest. "I would love to spend time with Ethan," she said, "if you really think it might help." They arranged for Sarah to visit Michael's house the following Saturday. It would be an experiment, Michael told himself. A way to observe Ethan in a different situation, collect data about his reactions in a less structured environment. But as he drove back home, Michael knew his motivations were more complex. There was something about Sarah that intrigued him deeply. Her ability to see beyond limitations, to connect with people in a genuine way, to find joy in simplicity. It was everything Michael had forgotten how to do, and for the first time in years, he felt curious about what it would be like to rediscover these lost skills. That night, while checking on Ethan during his nightly routine, Michael really looked at his son for the first time in a long time. Not to verify if the medical instructions were being followed or if the exercises had been completed properly. He simply looked at Ethan as a person. What he saw deeply disturbed him. Ethan was technically well cared for, physically healthy within his limitations, educationally stimulated. But where was the joy? Where was the natural curiosity of a 5-year-old child? Where was the unique personality that should be flourishing at this age? Michael realized that in trying to give Ethan everything he needed to succeed, he had inadvertently taken away everything that made him human. Saturday dawned with radiant sunshine, but Michael woke up with a feeling of nervousness he hadn't experienced since his early years as a businessman. He had spent the entire week rethinking the invitation made to Sarah, oscillating between expectation and regret. What kind of father needed a stranger to teach him how to interact with his own son? Ethan followed his usual morning routine. Physical therapy exercises, balanced breakfast, educational reading session. Michael observed everything with a different eye, noticing how each activity was executed with mechanical precision, without spontaneity or visible pleasure. When he explained that a friend would be visiting them, Ethan simply nodded politely, without showing curiosity or enthusiasm. Sarah arrived punctually at 10 o'clock, wearing simple jeans, a white t-shirt, and worn sneakers. She brought a small bag that aroused Michael's curiosity. She greeted Ethan with equal simplicity, crouching down to be at the height of his wheelchair, and asking how his week had been. "What did you bring in the bag?" Ethan asked, showing interest for the first time that morning. "Some things I thought you might like," Sarah answered mysteriously. "But first, how about showing me your house? I want to know your favorite places." Ethan led Sarah on a tour of the house, with Michael following at a distance. It was revealing to observe how Ethan described each environment. "The bedroom was where I do exercises. The TV room was where I watch educational documentaries. The garden was where I have outdoor therapy." Each space was defined by its therapeutic function, not by effective memories or pleasant experiences. Sarah listened attentively, asking questions that Michael had never thought to ask. "What's the most comfortable place in the house for you? Where do you like to be when you just want to relax?" Ethan was confused by the questions, as if the concept of relaxation without purpose was strange. "Let's create a special place today," Sarah suggested, opening her bag. "A place just for fun." She had brought simple materials: washable paints, large brushes, craft paper, colorful modeling clay, crayons. Nothing sophisticated or technologically advanced, just basic tools for free creativity. Michael felt an immediate impulse to interrupt. Ethan had clean clothes, the living room floor was impeccable, paints could cause unnecessary mess. But something in his son's expression made him hesitate. Ethan was looking at the materials with genuine curiosity, carefully touching one of the brushes as if it were a magical object. "Can we paint whatever we want?" Ethan asked, his voice carrying a note of admiration that Michael rarely heard. "Anything," Sarah confirmed. "It doesn't need to be pretty or correct or educational, just what you want to express." They spread craft paper on the living room floor, transforming the formal environment into an improvised studio. Sarah sat on the floor beside Ethan's wheelchair, placing the paints within his reach. Michael observed from a nearby armchair, divided between fascination and discomfort. Ethan began hesitantly, making small, careful strokes with the brush. He was clearly accustomed to structured artistic activities where there were models to follow and specific objectives to achieve. Sarah, noticing his tension, began to paint beside him, creating colorful abstract forms with free and carefree movements. "There's no wrong way to paint," she said softly. "Sometimes the best works of art come from letting your hand move on its own." Gradually, Ethan's strokes became looser. He experimented with mixing colors, creating unexpected shapes, letting the paint run across the paper. For the first time, Michael saw his son make purposeful mistakes, laughing when the paint spread beyond the imaginary boundaries. As the morning progressed, something extraordinary began to happen. Ethan started speaking spontaneously, not responding to directed questions, but sharing random thoughts that came to mind. He commented on the colors he liked most, invented stories about the shapes he was creating, asked silly questions that children normally ask. Sarah responded to everything with equal seriousness and interest, validating each comment as if it were deeply important. There was no educational agenda behind her responses, just genuine human connection. Michael realized he was witnessing something he hadn't seen in years, Ethan simply being a child, not a patient, not a recovery project, just a 5-year-old boy exploring the world through natural creativity and curiosity. Around noon, Sarah suggested they prepare lunch together. Michael started to mention that there was already planned food, prepared by the cook following Ethan's specific diet, but Sarah gently interrupted him. "How about we let Ethan choose what he wants to eat today?" she suggested, "and prepare it together." Ethan was visibly excited by the idea. He chose grilled cheese sandwiches, homemade French fries, and strawberry milkshakes, nothing that was part of his usual diet, but foods that any child would love. In the kitchen, Sarah taught Ethan to prepare his own sandwich, guiding his hands but letting him make the choices. They laughed when the cheese dripped out, celebrated when the fries turned golden at just the right point, got messy with the strawberry milkshake. Michael observed everything while standing in the doorway, feeling simultaneously touched and excluded. There was a lightness in the interaction between Sarah and Ethan that he didn't know how to reproduce. They talked as equals, without hierarchy or hidden agenda. During lunch, Ethan told Sarah about his dreams that Michael had never heard. He wanted to have a dog, learn to play guitar, travel to the beach. They were simple desires, typical of a child, but which had been neglected in favor of more important therapeutic goals. "Why didn't you tell your dad about this?" Sarah asked gently. Ethan looked at Michael with an expression that mixed love and distance. "Dad is always busy with important things," he said without resentment, just as a statement of fact. Michael felt the words like a stab in the chest. Ethan wasn't complaining, just describing his reality. A father who was physically present but emotionally absent, focused on solving problems instead of building a relationship. After lunch, Sarah proposed an even bolder activity, that they go to the park. Michael hesitated, concerned about logistics, accessibility, possible unforeseen events. But Ethan looked at him with such pure expectation that it was impossible to refuse. At the park, Sarah pushed Ethan's wheelchair to a spot with pleasant shade, where other families were having picnics and children were playing freely. Michael had taken Ethan to parks before, but always in a structured way, with specific objectives and limited time. This time, they simply stayed there. Sarah and Ethan watched other children playing, commented on dogs that passed by, made up stories about the clouds in the sky. There was no schedule, no goals to achieve. It was then that something happened that changed Michael forever. A girl of about 7 approached Ethan, curious about his wheelchair. Michael tensed, ready to intervene with educational explanations about inclusion and differences. But Sarah simply let Ethan answer the girl's questions for himself. He explained naturally that he couldn't walk, but that he could do many other things. The girl accepted the explanation without dramatization and asked if Ethan wanted to play something they could do together. They invented a guessing game, then told bad jokes that made them laugh until their stomachs hurt. Michael watched his son interact socially in a completely natural way, without adult mediation or therapeutic objectives. When it was time to return home, Ethan was visibly more relaxed, more present. During dinner, he talked more than he had in months, telling about the afternoon in the park, asking when Sarah would return, expressing opinions about things he wanted to do. After Ethan went to sleep, Michael and Sarah stayed talking in the living room. She had stayed to help clean up the paint mess, but Michael realized he didn't want her to leave just yet. "Ethan is a wonderful child," Sarah said as they put away the art materials. "He just needed permission to be himself." "I didn't know I was preventing that," Michael admitted, feeling the weight of his own inadequacy. "I thought I was giving him everything he needed." "You gave him many important things," Sarah responded gently. "Excellent medical care, quality education, stable structure. But maybe he also needs things that can't be planned or purchased." "Like what?" "Wasted time, conversations without purpose, permission to be imperfect. Someone who loves him not for what he can achieve, but simply for existing." Michael remained silent, absorbing the words. It was a revolutionary concept for someone who had spent his entire life measuring value through achievements and results. "How did you learn these things?" he finally asked. Sarah smiled softly. Growing up in a family that didn't have the financial resources to solve everything with money, we had to solve problems with presence, patience, and love. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective. That night after Sarah left, Michael stayed up late rethinking the entire day. He had witnessed his son transform before his eyes, not through advanced therapy or expensive equipment, but through genuine attention and unconditional acceptance. Even more disturbing was recognizing that Sarah had accomplished in a few hours what he hadn't managed in 5 years, making Ethan feel truly loved for who he was, not for what he could become. Michael realized he had been so focused on fixing Ethan that he had forgotten to simply appreciate him, so concerned with the future that he had lost the present, so determined to be the perfect father that he had forgotten to be human. And for the first time since Ethan's birth, Michael cried. Not tears of frustration or self-pity, but tears of recognition that he had lost precious years by not knowing how to distinguish between loving and controlling. But there was also hope in those tears. Because if Sarah had been able to connect with Ethan so quickly, perhaps it wasn't too late for Michael to learn to do the same. Perhaps it was never too late to start being the father that Ethan really needed, instead of the father that Michael thought he should be. The next morning, Michael woke up with a clear decision. He wanted to learn from Sarah not just how to better care for Ethan, but how to reconnect with his own humanity. He wanted to rediscover the man who had existed before success, control, and suffocating expectations. He wanted to learn to love without an agenda, and he suspected that Sarah was exactly the person who could teach him that. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Michael, Ethan, and Sarah has deeply moved you. This journey of discovering true love and genuine parenthood reminds us that the most valuable human connections cannot be bought or planned, only experienced with an open heart. To continue sharing these emotions with us, we've prepared a special playlist with equally touching stories about family, love, and second chances. You can find it by clicking right here. If this story touched you as we hope, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring narratives that explore the beauty and complexity of human relationships. Don't miss our upcoming content and tell us in the comments which part of the story moved you the most. We're eager to read your reflections and continue this emotional journey together.